Hi, everyone. Good afternoon. Thank you so much for joining us today in our webinar, Centering Disabilities in the Classroom. And today I am going to be talking with athlete, disability advocate, and author of Tenacious, Patty Cisneros Prevo. Patty, we are so happy to have you here today. So we're going to introduce ourselves really quickly before we dive into this amazing content. My name is Katie Potter. I'm the Senior Literacy Manager at Lee and Low Books. I am a white woman. I have blue eyes and I have brown hair that's pulled back in a bun. I am wearing a striped collared shirt and I am not disabled. I develop the teacher's guides and educator resources on our website, and I also work with universities, nonprofit organizations, and curriculum developers on incorporating our books into their respective programs. And Patty.
Hello, everyone. Thank you, Katie. Thank you also for sharing that visual description. My name is Patty Cisneros Prevo. I use pronouns she, her, and ella. And I am the author of Tenacious. I'm super excited to share that with you all today. Today I am wearing, I call it my Power Plum suit. So I have a plum jacket with a turtleneck underneath that has some flowery designs. I'm a brown Mexican woman. I'm also a wheelchair user. I have long brown hair, and today I'm wearing my glasses so I can see the screen better. All right, I'm going to pass it back to you, Katie.
Thanks so much, Patty. So first, to go over our agenda today, I will be briefly introducing Tenacious and giving a summary, and then we are going to hear from Patty all about the development of Tenacious, and we're going to dive into preferred language and lots of preferred and best practices to use in the classroom. Finally, we'll conclude with our educational resources, and we will then go into question and answer. So a few more logistical details before we begin. Closed captioning is enabled for this webinar. You can click the CC icon at the bottom of your screen. And we understand that having a sign language interpreter is preferred practices in the deaf community. And we hope to provide this accommodation in our future webinars. So we have closed caption, and thus we have closed captioning enabled for this particular webinar and hope to have the accommodation for a sign language interpreter in our future presentations and webinars. So thank you all for your patience on that front. And also a quick note before we begin. Like any historically marginalized community, the disabled community encompasses a wide range of lived experiences. Our webinar today shines a light on one facet of this experience, physical disability. We recognize that many of you in the audience today, and also who are going to watch the recording of this webinar, also work with cognitively disabled young people, and we hope to one day host a webinar on this subject. So we know that some questions will come up, and if you can save those questions for the future, we would greatly appreciate it.
And Katie, to that, I just want to add that, around Tenacious and just on this webinar, these are my lived experiences. I certainly don't speak for the disabled community at large. I hope to shine a light on some of the individuals in the book and their disabilities, but certainly I don't speak for everyone with a disability. So I just want to make that disclaimer as well. These are some of the best practices I use and some language that I prefer. And so just want to make that note before we move forward.
Thanks so much, Patty. So to introduce Tenacious 15 Adventures Alongside Disabled Athletes, it's available now for purchase on our website. You can see here about some ordering information. And I wanted to start off with this wonderful review from Booklist. This upbeat offering promises profiles of 15 disabled athletes, but delivers even more. Readers will come away with an enhanced understanding of the scope of adaptive sports and great respect for these dedicated, tenacious athletes. Such an incredible review, Patty.
Yay.
Dr. Anjali Forber-Pratt, Paralympic medalist and disability activist, said about Tenacious, "This is precisely the book I dreamed of growing up as a young girl with a disability. It shows what is possible to achieve and acknowledges the very real hard points, while fostering and supporting healthy, positive disability identity development."
And we should mention that Dr. Anjali Forber-Pratt. Were you going to say that, Katie? And I
No, go
interrupted
ahead,
you?
Patty. I wanted to leave that up to you.
Okay, awesome. She is a baddie in the scene of disability activism and advocacy. She is actually a member of the Biden and Harris administration. So she is a very instrumental power player in our disabled community. And so to have a quote from her that lives on the cover of Tenacious is a true, true honor.
Thank you so much, Patty. Okay, so I wanted to give an example spread of what you will find in Tenacious. So in this nonfiction picture book, you'll meet 15 disabled athletes. Here's an example, Mira Von Nelson, an adaptive surfer who shreds waves while sitting down. And so Tenacious tells their stories and more, revealing the daily joys and challenges of life as a disabled athlete. So you can see an example here underneath where it describes Mira Von Nelson. It also depicts the daily challenge and daily joy alongside a couplet, which is on the illustrated spread. So each spread in this book is dedicated to each athlete with vibrant illustrations from the very talented Diane MDB, as well as in comprehensive back matter, an author's note, glossary, timeline about the Paralympic Games, and bibliography. All wonderful features in a nonfiction book, and we are really going to discuss those features at the end with Patty. And again, the couplet, I wanted to mention also, the couplet gives accessibility to readers, while on the right-hand side, you have more text. That really is, it's such a wonderful book for all ages. And so Patty, take it away. We're going to hear about Patty's reasons behind writing Tenacious.
Awesome. Thank you, Katie. Thank you, Lee and Lowe and the marketing team. You all are truly the dream team to work with. So thank you all. All right. Why I started writing Tenacious. So a little bit of history about myself. I started playing wheelchair basketball in 1998. So I'm going to date myself. Don't try to figure out my age. Just kidding. And I quickly got involved in the wheelchair basketball scene. I played at the University of Illinois and then went on to compete at 3 Paralympic Games. And at 2 of them, we were gold medalists. So back-to-back gold medalists.
Wow.
In 2004 and 2008. So it was wonderful, a wonderful experience. And then to cap my wheelchair basketball career, I also played overseas in Germany. And on that team, we won 3 championship cups. So it was a very rich, full experience in the adaptive sport world. So after that, I moved on. I got married and I had my kids. I went back to teaching. So I used to be a 4th and 5th grade teacher. And during this time of jumping back into the teaching world and also having kids, I was surrounded by children's literature. I loved books. I remember in my undergraduate studies, my favorite class was the Kid Lit class that everybody had to take, but it was something that I wanted to take every semester and I knew I couldn't. So I immersed myself in children's literature. And then I started noticing that there was a huge lack of diversity in children's books, not only with Black and brown individuals or BIPOC, Black, Indigenous people of color, but also disabled characters. And so I underwent like this very intentional search to find as many books as I could on disability. And there was very, very few. So being very naive, I was like, I'm going to write this book. I'm going to write about people that I know throughout my experience with wheelchair basketball and the Paralympics and the disabled community at large, because there are so many extraordinary, tenacious people that I knew about that weren't being shared, in our society through social media, through media, just in general, newspapers, TV shows, whatever. And so I really wanted to highlight and push to the forefront disability. And so that was really the reason I started writing Tenacious. And it was because my kids were the catalyst. It was like I was trying to find books for my kids as well as my students that had disabled characters. And so, I really wrote this book for them.
Thank you so much, Patty.
Yeah.
And now, if we can transition to talking about using Tenacious in educational settings, how would you, as a former educator and using your knowledge, how would you set this book up for educators, librarians, families?
Yes. Oh my gosh, there's so much in this book that I hope that educators will use. First of all, just disability in general. Like I said, there's such a lack of disabled characters, books on disability in the vast world of children's literature. So just to have that representation in your classroom is so important. There may be a student that you have that may have a non-apparent disability and or have a parent disability. And so it's really important to have that representation in your classroom. And even if you don't have any disabled students, it's important for non-disabled students to see that representation as well. I hope that people will use Tenacious in a very inclusive way. I think we all want to be celebrated for who we are, whether that is, for our disability or our race, our sexual orientation, whatever it is, we're all human and we want to feel like we are valued and respected and we have a sense of belonging in where we are. And so having Tenacious really brings that inclusive lens into the classroom that, here's a disabled person. This is important for our community of learners to learn about. It's important to value their experiences and be mindful and aware of these experiences and then celebrate that. So really being inclusive and being aware of some of the differences. Differences aren't bad, they're just different. And so again, understanding that a disability is an identity. It's something to be celebrated. It may be different from, student X to student Y. And so being able to bring that inclusivity in the classroom is really important. And just cultivating an environment in your classroom that celebrates these differences. Disability shouldn't be viewed as something negative because it is different. And so when you celebrate a book like Tenacious by having it displayed or reading it as a read aloud or reviewing the back matter, you are modeling that this is an important identity to share with the classroom. And so that trickles down to your students and your students are so young and impressionable, and they are really the change makers to change these stereotypes around disabilities and change that language around disability. And so there's multiple ways, including the back matter, which I know we'll get to in a little bit. And then also language. Language is so important. I will touch on this throughout the webinar, but I made a very intentional decision to use identity first language in writing Tenacious. So identity first language puts the identity before the person. So disabled person, disabled athletes. Person first language puts the person before the identity. So person with a disability, athlete with a disability. And I made this intentional decision because language is constantly evolving. Language is very important. And for classroom settings, it's important to sort of go with the wave of these evolutions. Person first language is obviously okay to use. And I should note that language should always be left up to the individual on how they want to identify. Person first language was really important back in the civil rights era and the ADA movement, when disabled individuals were really just asking for our government, for legislation to view them as people, as human. They are human that need rights. And so person first language was very important at that time. And just like many things, language evolves and movements evolve. So we went from, sort of the ADA movement, the disabled rights movement, to disability justice. That's where I'm at now in my own learning about my identity, about the disabled community. And my disability is a very salient identity. Disability is, again, an identity, it's a culture. I want to identify with that first. So I say disabled person, just like I say I'm a Mexican woman. I don't say I'm a woman of Mexican descent because that Mexican identity is very salient. So that's really important. And I'm hoping that teachers and educators can have these conversations in the classroom about the evolution of language and what's important to use and what may be outdated.
Thank you so much, Patty. That's all
Yeah.
really helpful, important, critical information as we start the school year, whether we're starting the school year now in a few weeks. So thank you so much for setting that up for all of us. And now, you touched on this a little bit in the last slide, but featuring and centering disabled people in books, can you touch on a little bit more about negative stereotypes, perhaps what educators should really examine when they're looking for books to add to their library? You talked about disability as an identity, but if you could elaborate even more.
Yeah, thank you, Katie. There are a plethora of negative stereotypes and microaggressions that are used toward disabled people. And by writing Tenacious, I'm really hoping that young readers see disability in a different light. And they will be the ones to dismantle these negative stereotypes and these stigmas and these microaggressions that are being used by seeing individuals in a book that have disabilities. I think the power of the illustration and the words can really start, shaping a different perception of what disability is. And I say this and I will say it over and over again, disability really is an identity. Like if you are a female, if you identify as non-binary, if you are, Black, if you are a veteran, if you are a first generation student, these are all identities that are very salient to us, and disability should be included in these identities. Um, you know, with the stereotypes around disabled people, they're helpless or they need help. You need to interfere. You need to, they don't have a good quality of life because they're not walking or talking or whatever it is. I'm hoping that these 15 athletes in Tenacious can show you that, we're just people. We're people and we have this identity that is important. Katie, one of the things that I want to talk about also is like the daily challenge and the daily joy. These people are extraordinary. I mean, don't get me wrong, they are amazing. But they're people just like you and me. Again, they have an identity of disability. And they also have these daily joys and daily challenges, just like you and me. And so, really trying to view the person as a whole person. Oftentimes, it's great to identify that someone has a disability, but oftentimes that's all people think about. And then they surround that thinking with some of those negative stereotypes and stigmas that come with that identity. And so by providing that daily joy and that daily challenge, I hope we'll move away from some of that negative perception of people with disabilities. For example, Dr. Andrea Woodson Smith here on this spread, You know, both of her daily challenge and daily joy talk about her kids. How many teachers and educators and administrators out there who will have their hands on Tenacious can resonate with that? Like, a daily joy is being able to spend as much free time with her teenage boys as possible because they still enjoy it. And she knows that one day that won't be the case. And so I think that's really relatable, whether you have a disability or not. So really viewing people as disabled people as whole people and not solely focusing on just a disability, even though, yes, it's a very salient identity, but that, you know, Dr. Angela Woodson Smith is also a professor. You know, she's a mom of two, she's a wife, and she's a baddie athlete. So hopefully you can get that from Tenacious and you can share that with the students that you work with.
Well, the daily joys and challenges is an immediate way for kids and educators to connect with the text.
Yes.
And a way that they understand and appreciate. So it's such an incredible feature of the book.
Yeah, thank you.
Actually, before we talk about this slide, Patty, you know, in terms of language and then moving away from the stereotypes, I wanted to quickly ask you, you know, you chose words like empowerment, strength, resiliency, tenacity. Can you touch on those decisions and why you made them and why you stayed away from other words that are often used with the disabled within the disabled community?
Yes, thank you so much, Katie. I appreciate this question because I wanted words that really described who these individuals are. You know, when I think about these athletes, they're so gritty, they're tough, they work hard. It doesn't matter that they have a disability. I'm just talking about the person. Like, they're just go-getters, they persevere. And grit comes to mind. So I was really trying to think about words that would describe them. When I first began this journey, the title of this book was actually called Unstoppable. And I have learned so much throughout this process of writing Tenacious, but also in my own life as a diversity, equity, and inclusion professional. I learned more about disability identity and also ableism. Ableism very basically is, and I don't know if I'm skipping ahead, but maybe I can just talk on it now. You know,
Yeah.
ableism is to define it very broadly, it's the discrimination and or oppression against people with disabilities, just like sexism and racism, and we have classism. Ableism is so pervasive in our society that many people don't even know it, acknowledge it, or understand it. And so throughout my my experience writing this book, I learned a little bit about ableism. And so when I thought about my title, Unstoppable, I was like, oh my gosh, this is one of those words that we often use with disabled people. It sort of sensationalizes disability. It's what we call inspiration porn. Like, we highlight disabled people for the feel good of non-disabled people. It's not for our community, it's for non-disabled individuals to feel good about themselves and say, oh, well, that's so great. So words like unstoppable, inspiring, inspiration. Oh, I hate that word. Very, very controversial in the community. I will say that. And I really wanted to move away from those words because they're often used negatively in our community. They're not often used to their definition, to their meaning. And I'll give you an example. Inspiration or inspire. Like, when I go to the grocery store and I get stopped and someone says, oh, you're so inspirational, that's just garbage. You know, like, you're shopping, I'm shopping, we're doing things that we probably don't want to do. That's not inspiring you to do anything. But me winning 2 gold medals, yeah, certainly that's inspiring. If that is the catalyst for you to do something. Maybe you sign up for a marathon, or maybe you sign up for that 5K, or maybe you go for a bike ride. If we can use the language appropriately, I'm okay with that. But words like unstoppable and inspiring haven't been used appropriately. So I really wanted to move away from that. And so I had a great conversation with Cheryl Klein, who was the beginning editor of Tenacious. And we talked about the title at length, like what title can we have? And I just kept going back to grit. Nobody wants to read a book that's grit. Or maybe they do. I don't know. Maybe there's a book out there. I shouldn't say that. And so we came up with Tenacious, and I loved it. I wanted to call it the Tenacious Team. And my best friend, Christina Rip Schwab, who's actually one of the featured athletes in Tenacious, she was like, no way, that's way too cheesy. Just call it Tenacious. And so, yeah, we stuck with Tenacious. And I hope that people also look up what that means, because I've had other people ask me like, well,
Yeah,
what does that mean? Like, what does tenacious mean? I haven't heard that word, or kids will ask me. And so I think that's another teaching point.
absolutely. That's what
Yeah,
you start the conversation with,
yes,
Mhm.
yes. And then when I think about, using appropriate language in setting up like inclusive and accommodating classrooms, again, there's just so much language that changes over time. In the back matter, and I know we'll get to this a little bit, talking about some words to maybe move away from, some words that I really suggest that you give up and you try these other ones and see how they fit, especially in the classroom setting, because these are the young kids that will continue to use that language for years. And then, there'll be another generational wave that will change the language. But at this point, you are like the keepers of really implementing that change with language.
Right. Actually, before we move on quickly, Patty, can you touch on hope really quick? Sorry, before we segue into the next slide.
Yes, absolutely. So when I'm talking about inclusion and how to use Tenacious in the classroom, really bringing that inclusive lens, I was very mindful of the athletes I chose. I wanted to highlight, diversity. I'm a diversity, equity, and inclusion professional. I really wanted to highlight the diversity within adaptive sports and the disabled community. And so intersectionality was very important to me. I just didn't want to highlight people that just had disabilities. There are a ton. I mean, I think 1 in every 5 individuals in the entire world have a disability. And so I was very mindful of intersecting identities of race, gender, gender identity, first generation status or immigration status. And so Hope Llewellyn is the only LGBTQ identifying person in Tenacious. It was really important to highlight her because she mentors other LGBTQ plus identifying disabled athletes, both on and off the court. So she
Yeah.
has this huge influence, and she's a very out and proud and knows that her experiences can really help, struggling kids who are growing up, who are questioning their identity or trying to navigate different spaces because of their identities. Hope holds many historically marginalized identities. She is Mexican, she's a woman, she identifies as a lesbian, and she's disabled. And so she's very mindful of her intersecting identities and the power that she has in talking to other students, other athletes that have similar intersecting identities. So she's great. I love Hope. I actually played wheelchair basketball with Hope. She's an incredible athlete. She's done almost every adaptive sport and has excelled in those sports. But here I highlight her in tennis.
Thanks so much, Patty. Okay, so we have been talking a lot about the back matter, and here we are. Um, this is just the timeline of the Paralympics, but we don't necessarily have to go into that, Patty, because I'd love to talk more about your author's note and then some other features with the language. So when you purchase a copy of Tenacious, the timeline of the Paralympics is in the back. Patty, do you want to add anything on about like the development of this before I go on to the next slide?
Yeah, I mean, I think from this timeline, you can see that the Paralympics are still fairly new. It was really important to add this section to Tenacious because I think it's important to really differentiate between the three games that we know. So we have the Special Olympics for those that have cognitive disabilities. We have the Olympics, not the regular Olympics or the normal Olympics, just the Olympics. And those are for non-disabled individuals. And then we have the Paralympics. And so when I first started playing back in, 1998, there was very little language awareness education around the Paralympics, and we were often confused with the Special Olympics. And so, thankfully, and nothing wrong with the Special Olympics, but they're very different, and we have to honor that difference. Thankfully, the movement has evolved. We're getting sponsorships just like the Olympians. We're getting media coverage just like the Olympians. The Paralympics actually means parallel to the Olympics. Oftentimes people think Paralympics, paraplegics, so they like sort of connect it that way, but that's not the case. It means parallel to the Olympics. And the Paralympics actually start 2 weeks after the Olympics closing ceremonies. And that's just because of an access thing. It would be really difficult to house all of the Olympians and all of the Paralympians in the village and all of the venues at the same time. So it was a very intentional decision to start the Paralympics 2 weeks after the Olympics closing ceremonies and then make all the accommodations and adaptations that are needed. And so with this piece here, I really wanted to highlight the Paralympics. And I really want people to use that language. It's a bit frustrating when someone's like, oh, here's my friend Patty. She's a 2-time Olympian. And I have to do the little, like, let's interrupt that. Let's really highlight the Paralympics because we need that awareness. We need that education. And again, as young kids, in the classroom, it would be wonderful if teachers and educators start sharing that language of Paralympics. And then it just became part of, the everyday vernacular in our society.
Yeah. Another great way for students to get involved with research projects, that's it, all of that's in the educator guide, highlighting different elements of the Paralympics. So thanks so much, Patty, for including that section. So here is the author's note, Patty, and we talked about ableism before, but if you wanted to describe again, ways that we can incorporate our knowledge of ableism into our respective settings, whether, in any setting, whether it's the classroom, library, or any professional environment.
Yeah, thank you, Katie. I think that ableism can be taught at a very young age. And my kids, Elliot and Eliana, who are listed in my daily joy, I kind of feel bad because they're like, Mom, why is our section so small and you have like such a big section for the daily challenge? I'm like, oh, I should have thought about that. But, there's certainly aware of ableist language, ableist culture in our society because I taught them that. And granted, yes, their mom is disabled, but I think that educators and teachers can have these conversations in the classroom, just like they're having conversations around racism. I think after George Floyd was murdered back in 2020, it opened up these like very rich conversations on what is racism, what is systemic racism, what does that look like in our world? And I think that is very easy to do also with ableism. I think we're seeing more and more disability representation in our society. And so it's really important to have these conversations and not think like, oh, kids are too little for that, or like, first grade, that's too young for this. So you can give them that basic definition that I gave you all, like the discrimination and or oppression of disabled people. Or you can, if you have higher grades, like 5th grade, that was always my favorite grade, 4th and 5th grade. You can go into this hardier definition of ableism. It's by disabled activist Talila T.L. Lewis. Talila identifies as a queer, Black, non-binary, disabled person, uses they, them pronouns. And Talila has this working definition. So it's not, it hasn't met an end. Talila has continued to evolve and edit and revise this definition of ableism as a system of assigning value to people's bodies and minds based on societally constructed ideas of normalcy, productivity, desirability, intelligence, excellence, and fitness. One of the things that I really like that Talila touches on is that you don't have to be disabled to experience ableism. And so if you are a teacher in the upper grades, I really encourage you to Google Talila T.L. Lewis. Her blog will have this working definition of ableism and even dissect that. It's a very hardy definition that I continue to revisit, but I think that is really easy to do in the classroom, is to look at that language. One other thing I want to talk about in my author's note, I talk a little bit about my life. You know, I became disabled at the age of 18. I was a freshman in college. And one of the things that I think I have written in here, I can't remember, you know, anyone, no matter of race, class, ethnicity, gender, can become a part of the disabled community at any time. It doesn't discriminate. And so it's really important to be mindful of disability and language and resources. And so I provide some resources because, like me, I was 18, I was in a car accident, and I was thrusted into this world of disability that I had zero knowledge on. And so was really reliant on other people to help me find resources and support. And I've found wheelchair basketball through my physical therapist. And so I say that in my author's note, like if you know someone who has acquired disability or has a disability, a family, a friend, an acquaintance that you know that this book can help, oh, please reach out to them, share it with them. You know, even if they don't buy the book, if they just Google some resources, it makes the world of difference. I will say that, you know, when my physical therapist introduced wheelchair basketball to me, it really changed my life. It's so corny to say that. And when I hear myself say that, I'm like, oh my God, that's so corny. But it's so true. It's so true. It changed the trajectory of my life. I saw other disabled people. And, you know, again, we're human and we crave that feeling of belongingness. And so I found this community that I could relate to, that their experiences resonated with me. And that's what I needed. It was so much more than sport for me. It was therapeutic for me, mentally, physically, emotionally, psychologically. I was with my people. And I hope that when people read the back matter and read my author's note, that they can share this resource with people that they may know who are disabled. And I was going to say one more thing and I just lost my train of thought. It'll come back to me, or just lead them to my website as well. You know, since the publication date, June 27th, I have had probably a dozen or so requests or inquiries about so-and-so has a daughter who is in a wheelchair. I'd love to get my hands on Tenacious, or a physical therapist that I just met last week. Oh my goodness, I'm working with this girl who has cerebral palsy, just like Annabelle, who is in the first slide. Tenacious would be great for her to see, like, there again, 1 out of 5 people in our entire world have a disability of some sort. And so passing this resource off for them or to them could do wonders. And I'm not tooting my own horn. I just, like, as I'm coming close to my own.
You should.
I was like, oh, that sounded kind of narcissistic, but like,
No.
you know, Katie, I'm actually coming up on my anniversary of my car accident. So I was injured in September 15th of 1996. And had I had this resource, and I hear this from all my friends in the wheelchair basketball community, like, it could have really changed a lot for me. Like, I
Mhm.
think that people that acquire a disability, it's tough. I mean, it's really hard that you live your life in one way and then all of a sudden it's drastically changed. And so, like, having a book that you see other people with identities that you're now a part of, I think could really, make a difference in people's lives.
Absolutely. And I wanted to touch on what you said about physical therapists. And so this is not exclusive to educators, librarians, families thinking about letting the physical therapy community know about this book who have even more access to kids.
Absolutely.
So thank you.
If I could do the heart thing that everybody does, I would do that for physical therapists because really my physical therapist like changed my life.
Yeah. Okay, so here, Patty, take us through the preferred language in this book. I found this section incredibly helpful, an incredibly helpful resource to guide my thinking, and it really changed my perspective. So if you could just enlighten the audience today, that would be great.
Yes, this is like my favorite part and my favorite section of the webinar. Um, this was, sort of in the thick of my own disability identity exploration and the language that I used as a disabled person for so long. So when I got injured, I was very much operating around the medical model of disability. And so just very briefly, because that's a whole webinar on its own, disability falls on the person. Like, it's your fault, your responsibility, you figure it out. And so we're often fed in society to be independent, to overcome, to try to walk again. And that's how a lot of disabled people operate. And so I guilty, ashamed, like that's what I really navigated my life, through that lens. And so when I came up with this preferred language in the book section, it was in the thick of my own exploration around disability identity and ableism. And I was like, you know what? People need to change their language. Like, we got to change it. And who can
Yeah.
we best start with? Our kids, right? These young ones who will take this language and use it, hopefully won't be opposed to change like adults are. So some of the language that I really hope you as teachers and educators and administrators will use and model and share with your students. The first one is euphemisms that go around the words disability and disabled. We hear
Yeah.
these euphemisms all the time. Disabled with a capital A, differently abled, physically challenged, creatively standing, or all these terrible euphemisms. I will be the first to admit I use these. I used these euphemisms again, operating through that medical model of disability throughout most of my adult life. And I didn't know better. And so, I like to say you don't know what you don't know. Now you all know. So I'm really encouraging you all to use the words disabled and disability. So in Tenacious, I say disabled and disability are not bad words. Having a disability or being disabled is a culture and an identity. So I am disabled. I have a disability. I'm not creatively challenged. I am disabled. It's an identity. And so really encourage you all educators to model and share that language in the classroom. The second one is handicapped. There are many words that are just plain outdated, and handicapped is one. And it's kind of cringy to me when I hear it because I feel like I'm in a space where people are starting to change language, use preferred language. Handicap is just outdated. So language is constantly changing, and handicap is outdated. We prefer the word accessible. So they are parked in an accessible parking spot, not handicap spot, an accessible parking spot. She is using the accessible bathroom stall. So again, just a little shift. Here's one that is a bit controversial. Instead of use your voice, use your platform. So not everybody has spoken language. And I've actually got some pushback on this because people will say to me, well, voice can be something that we talk about like universally, like use your power. So then I push back on them and I say, okay, then why don't you say power or say
Right.
platform?
Yeah.
So really use the words that you mean to say. This is really important for those that for individuals that don't have spoken language. So, we see oftentimes like use your voice, talk, speak up. You can say, as an example here, the activist used his platform. The celebrity used her power to talk about issues of blank. Um, Next one is my favorite, and I say that very sarcastically because I am a wheelchair user. Wheelchair bound. And this is a word that really stems from that medical model of disability. I now work at the University of Wisconsin Health, hospitals and clinics. So I work with many doctors and I'm very much in that healthcare scene. And wheelchair bound is one of those words that stem from medicine, from that medical model of disability. I'm certainly not bound to my chair. I can get in and out of my chair quite easily. And even those that can't move in and out of their chair easily, they don't sit in their chair. They don't sleep in their chair. They don't shower in their chair. They're either transferred or you transfer. And so we really encourage people to say wheelchair user. So the kid is a wheelchair user, not the kid is wheelchair bound. And then the last one, oh no, everyone hold on to your seats because this is the probably the most controversial. Special needs. And this is pervasive in education. And we can debate and you can push back, and I appreciate that. But as someone in the disabled community, we are really encouraging non-disabled people to move away from that language. These needs are not special. They're just needs. We've tagged on special because of the disability. It is a microaggression. You're saying that they're special because they're disabled. No, these are needs because they need needs. Just like you need water and you need, maybe you need extra time on a test, or maybe you need a standing desk because you have arthritis in your leg. We all have needs. And so the student was given extra time for the test to better meet her needs. And I will say that parents who have disabled children and teachers who have disabled students are sort of the ones that have continued to perpetuate special needs in settings. And so I really encourage you first to pause because I know that it brings some extra feelings up. Just pause and reflect on why and how you got started using that language. And one of the things that I like to say to people when I sort of get like that pushback is, if the disabled community, if those who are in the community with those identities are asking you not to use this language, why do you continue to use the language anyway? I know that that's really hard to hear and say, but ask yourself, why do you continue to use that language that those that identify that way don't want you to use? So hopefully these are like very tangible action items that you can use in the classroom setting. And I'm super excited about our young learners just taking this language and going with it.
And Patty, what you mentioned about why are you continuing to use these words, because it requires practice and it requires
Yes.
reference, and put this language up in whatever setting that you're in so that you can continue to refer to it. It takes effort on our part to make these changes. And so
Yes.
thank you for giving us this valuable resource in the back of the book. And here's a even more terminology from the glossary. Patty, did you want to talk about anything on this slide?
No, I think I say no and then I start talking. Yes, maybe. There are a lot of hard words in the disabled community because you have all these disabilities and then you have all these adaptive sports and all these adaptive equipment. So I just provided this glossary. I think, when I think about back in my 4th grade, 5th grade teaching days, I think this would be a very useful tool when kids are doing, a report or using language or a summary. They can use these words and then they have this in their vocabulary. So yes, please use the glossary, because some of these words like osteogenesis imperfecta, that's really hard. So hopefully the glossary helps with that.
Mhm. Okay, so we have about 10 minutes left. I'm going to talk really briefly about where you can find the educator guide. So here on the book page on our website, you can it says view the teacher's guide, and it follows the template for all of our educator guides, but very thorough with different variety of questions. And I highly encourage everyone to check it out. These are some example activities. And Patty offered, as I mentioned before, I write the educator guides along with our literacy team, and Patty offered her wonderful insight and support with this educator guide. So thank you so much, Patty. And first, you can, this is a great way to kick off the school year by doing an audit of all the titles featuring disabled characters in your classroom, going through the books of what you have, thinking about what books that you need to add, working collaboratively with your school administration, with your school librarian, and within your district on incorporating more books like Tenacious into your respective setting. And then here are some other examples. We've talked a lot about perspectives and using this as an opportunity to discuss how Tenacious change students' perspective on adaptive sports and disabilities. And this book is a way to use students' platforms to use Patty's term. And okay. So anyway, we are on to the question and answer portion of our webinar. And Patty, I have a few questions that I wanted to start with, and then we can get to someone to some of the questions in the chat and the Q&A. So please, we welcome everyone to add those in. An audience member, Patty, expressed an interest in universal design. Would you be comfortable sharing with us your understanding of universal design for those that may be unfamiliar with this term, and talking with us about your experience when it comes to wheelchair accessibility, of course, if you're comfortable on touching on that.
Rookie mistake. I had myself on mute. Yes, thank you, Katie, for that question. Universal design could be a webinar in and itself. There's so much that goes into universal design, but just very broadly, it's the design to be very inclusive of all needs. And so it's not just, when you're designing a space or a classroom or a new building, it's not just the physical disability, the wheelchair accessibility. You're also being mindful of those who are blind or low vision. Do you have Braille? Do you have the raised bumps? You're also keeping in mind the deaf or hard of hearing community. Do you have an interpreter at the beginning? Do you have materials or documents readily available if there is a hearing component? And so, very broadly, I think universal design is designing with everyone in mind. Elderly people, it's just not those in the disabled community. It's like, young, their parents who have strollers, they're elderly who use canes or walkers. And so it's like this idea of designing for inclusion of all. And I've worked with colleagues at the University of Wisconsin when I was employed there. specifically the McBurney Disability Center, which I want to give a big shout out to. And, you can go into 2-hour webinars talking about the intricacies of universal design. So I'm just giving you a very broad definition, but I encourage you to think about universal design in your classroom. Is it wheelchair accessible? Is it, is it neurodiverse friendly? Is it blind, low vision friendly? Just thinking about not just wheelchair access. And I think that's what people often do is when they think about universal design, they think, which is great for me, but it's not great for, others in the community.
Okay. Well, actually, to that end, Patty, I wanted to. There was a question, and we've talked about this in the past, about partners that we've worked with in the publishing industry. Their names are Bookshare and NIMAC, and you can request accessible editions of Tenacious through these organizations, and then they reach out to us, and then we go through the approval process of accessing these editions. But we just wanted to let you know that, again, Bookshare and NIMAC, for example, Braille, to get Tenacious in Braille. And all of this is free of charge for the district and the school, because this initiative is federally funded. So I think that's imperative for everyone to know, and please keep that in mind as you're thinking about accessibility and, as Patty mentioned, different features of universal design to incorporate in your classroom.
Yeah, so excited for the Braille editions to come out. So thank you, Lee and Low team, for really making that happen. And
Yeah,
I'm excited to share that with former teachers and students.
yeah. So Patty, I think this will probably be our last question before we conclude. We have about 3 minutes. How can classroom teachers help educate others who aren't familiar with disabilities, all while maintaining confidentiality? How do you approach those topics? And what have you done?
Yes, that's such a great question because a common microaggression used toward disabled people is this lack of privacy. For you educators, I know that disabled students have an IEP, and who's privy to that IEP should be just a selected few. So when it comes to the individual, I think it's really important to think about who legally has access to this information. When you want to share it with others, I think first and foremost, you need to have that conversation with the individual and their family, especially when we're talking about students. So if there's student X in your classroom who has a disability, and you want to maybe talk about those experiences in your classroom, I think it would be best practice to have that conversation with the individual and their guardian, their parent, their grandparent, whoever it is, because ultimately they should have the autonomy, the say on whether they and their experiences can be used for a teaching moment. I don't think that you should ever talk about someone's disability without their consent. I think that's the case for many identities,
Mm,
low socioeconomic status students or immigration status students. Like, you don't want to talk about those things without the consent. So that would be first best practice. Second, if they say no, or if that's not something that is easily accessible, then I would really encourage you to use books to have those conversations. I know that Lee and Low has a vast library of great books centered around diversity, equity, and inclusion. Typically, these topics that are hard to talk about: race, racism, disability. Yay, Tenacious. There are so many great books that Lee and Low has published that you can use in your classroom if you want to talk about disability. And I'm certainly open to people wanting me to come to their classrooms or their schools to talk about disability, but I think it really is important to get that permission and that consent.
Actually, Patty, that is a really applicable for transition for talking about your website, and then potentially if you want to share any other kinds of programming that you offer in case there are educators and librarians and other audience members that are interested in learning more from you.
Yes, thank you, Katie. And this is great because I am currently working on this. So it's sort of like under construction in my website. But if you go to my website, pattycisnerosprevo.com, and you go to the services tab, it'll take you to 4 opportunities. So school visits, professional development, I think public speaking, and some consulting. Because of my profession as a diversity, equity, and inclusion professional, I've done multiple presentations on disability, on ableism. Now I have Tenacious that I can really talk about ableist language and culture with students. And so if you are interested, please go to my website, click on one of these options, send me an email and let me know what you're thinking. I provide both in-person and virtual options. And all of that is coming. I started, working on that last week, and it's like a work in progress because I have another job, so I got to balance the two. But if
You're
you are
busy.
interested, if you are interested, please, I'd love to, do a virtual school visit, in-person visit, and then talk to the teachers about the same content, but just a little bit more elevated.
Okay, wonderful, Patty. Thank you so much. And last but not least, please check us out. You can contact me for more information if you need a certificate for this webinar. And then these are a variety of our channels. Again, Patty, thank you so much. We have so many glowing comments from the chat about how terrific, how valuable, how great this webinar has been in expanding knowledge or providing the opportunity for audience members to connect with your experience, with your experiences. So really, we cannot, I keep saying this, but we cannot thank you enough for the time, your insights, your expertise, and being with us today. So
Yes,
thank
thank
you so much.
you. Thank you, Lee and Lo. And I see so many familiar faces in the chat. Thank you all for coming and supporting. And let's just share this wealth of knowledge with our students because they are the change makers. So thank you.
Totally. And what a great way to kick off the school year. So
Yay.
thank you so much, Patty. And we will talk soon. Thank you, everybody.